We just have a few more people to come in. There are some seats at the front. Do join. Good morning, everybody. What a fantastic turnout. If you're at the front, you can look behind you and you'll see this is the popular place to be. Even though it's sunny outside and we're in a dark tent. Welcome to what will be a fascinating and highly topical hour and a half provocation, debate and discussion on the virtues or indeed vices of virtual reality and how it may have an impact on the film and associated content ecosystem. Do come to the front. My name is Dan Eisen. I won't be involved in the session, but I'm delighted to be, if you like, the host, along with my colleagues here from Deloitte. And we're behind, powered by, you can see, behind the architecture of this session. Deloitte is a global professional services firm offering accounting, tax, corporate finance, and consulting services. We're the #1 media and entertainment organization in professional services in the world, servicing all the major studios as well as the rest of the value chain in the world of film, cinema, and related industries. So we're delighted to be here. Thank you for your time. And without further ado, I'll hand to Jeremy, who's moderating this session. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. Hello. Thank you, Dan, and hi, everybody. So we're going to start, I think, with a presentation from Paul at Deloitte, and then we'll go down the line and say hi to everybody, and we'll go from there with a conversation. Okay, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us here today. And my role at Deloitte is I just do research in the tech, media, and telecom space. It's a role I've been doing for 15 years. And as part of the research that we have done over the last few years, we have looked very, very carefully at virtual reality. We've been researching it on humans for the last couple of years, getting them to try out lots of equipment, try out lots of different content. And also we have spoken to many of the players who are in the virtual reality space or who may be in the virtual reality space. And one of the themes that we've had throughout this has been on what is the monetization likely to be. And the fascinating thing about VR is it's been in the news such a lot. So you've probably seen people trying out VR at places like Las Vegas, at the Consumer Electronics Show, at the Mobile Congress, which used to be over here, is now in Barcelona. And what we've seen is people queue for hours to try out virtual reality, and often for only 5 minutes at a time. So it's a fascinating area, one worth very much looking at. But as with all these things, the underlying question is, where's the money? What's the bottom line? So this is what the purpose of this session is now that we understand the technology, what is the bottom line? What is the monetization for this? So, and the technology. So what we're looking at is monetization for 2016. So for this year, what we're forecasting is virtual reality will generate about $1 billion. That's a 5-fold increase on 2015, so it's a massive increase. But it's worth putting $1 billion into perspective. So we're expecting 2/3 of that will come from hardware sales, and 1/3 will come from content. Now, $1 billion in consumer electronics terms is significant. 2/3 of $1 billion is not bad, but bear in mind that that is the value of the global smartphone market for one day, right? So by about mid-afternoon today, smartphones will have generated 2/3 of $1 billion in sales. And in terms of units, so we're expecting there to be about 2 to 2.5 million units of VR kits beyond cardboard being sold. And that is how many smartphones will have been sold by midday today. So the global smartphone market is 1.5 billion units. The tablet market is a few hundred million units. The television market, similar. The PC market, similar. So this is the perspective that you should look into this. Now, in terms of content, and this is where it really matters for CAN, so what's the content being created so far? And most of the content being created so far is for video games. And it's not Candy Crush in VR, but it's for core gamers. So the people who would often play for 40 hours at a weekend, often in the absence of sentimental companions. But that's the kind of content that we're looking at for this year. So the big question is, how do you move this into the mainstream? Because what we're effectively saying for this year is we're expecting this to be mostly about core gamers and high-end hardware. So the big monetization challenge is, how do we make this go mainstream? Now, this is our view, $1 billion for this year, and the fascinating thing is, what will it be for 2017? And it may not necessarily go up. So whenever you get a brand new technology, you get 1 year of a big surge of excitement. Remember Google Glass, for example, and the year after may well be a dip, or it may be a rise. So this is our view. This is another view, just to show there is polarity. So this is Goldman Sachs' view on the value of VR. And of course, we need to give Goldman Sachs credibility because they helped get Greece into the EU, so they should be taken seriously. And what they're saying is $80 billion in valuation for 2025, and this is their base case. So their optimal case is $125 billion in 2025. So that's a big market. So to put that in perspective, the US TV ad market, the biggest in the world, is about $75 billion. And that's from 300 million people watching an average of 200 adverts per day. So that's the kind of scale that they're talking about. And of course, they know what they're talking about. Possibly. Right. Come on the next slide, please. Right. So, so the question is, how large is the addressable market? Now, this here is one VR device. So there are several different flavors of VR. This is an example of full VR. So this is Oculus Rift, very well known, owned by the benign tech company Facebook. And that is $600. And the reason why it's expensive is because it has a really high-end screen in it. As you will know, when you drop your phone, because that's just a fact of life, replacing the screen is really expensive. That technology is expensive. That's why it's $600. Most smartphones in the current market cost $600 or less, including premium ones. What that needs to be paired with is a very powerful computer. So the kind of computer which may come with an inbuilt air vent because it gets very hot, about $1,500 or so. So if you don't have the equipment, you're looking at $2,000 for the full VR experience, the type that puts a beard on you spontaneously, as has happened with this young man over here. So can I have the next slide, please? Right, so that's 600. This here is the HTC device. So this was launched at Mobile World Congress back at the end of February or the beginning of March, $800. So that's even more expensive. And this basically would pay for every single model of mobile phone which is out there, apart from the diamond encrusted ones. So that's the level of spend. Now, if you think about why would people buy a smartphone, and it's the way in which you would justify a smartphone is you may own it for 2 years, and even at $700, if you look at it 50 times a day, or show it 50 times a day, it's 2 cents per glance for your habit. So it's a very good value for money addiction to have. Now, to amortize that, you have to quite like playing video games. Now, this is the Sony product which is coming out in October. This is the Morpheus products, I think it's called, and that will be costing about $400 in the US, 399 euros, plus the cost of the controllers. So again, how many people can use this? And when it comes back to monetizing VR content, we're looking at what's the addressable market which is out there. Are we talking millions or billions is a question that we should be asking. Now, you don't have to pay hundreds of dollars. You could pay $100 to start off with VR. So if you've got a certain brand of smartphone, so Samsung smartphone, then you can insert the device into this screen over here, and you can watch VR content. Depending on the model that you've got, you will get a certain amount of life of this because it's battery powered. So it may be about 30 minutes, I think, that will last for, but we have a speaker who's got a whole business based around these devices. It's $100 for the casing, and it's about 500 euros, is it? 700 in total for this. The devices sometimes, I've heard, they get quite hot because the phone's working flat out. So after 30 minutes, the battery may may run out. May be a bit warm. Your eyes may be a bit dry, but you'll have perfect teeth. So that's what the technology offers over there. Now, again, you don't have to spend all this money, so you can also buy cardboard or given it away. So like in New York Times gave away 1 million of these units. What we find is they're used a few times, but not very many times, partly because they're self-assembly. That's not always perfect, so you sometimes get spontaneous fragmentation or disassembly as well. And the quality of the smartphone in here can be any device. If it's a low-powered one, it won't move very quickly. So what you see will not be what your body's expecting to see. And what might happen as a result of that is you get a bit nauseous, or very nauseous as well. So VR, for most, the industry calls it virtual reality. Some people label it as vomit reality. Depends on the experience that you have. Now, another question is around monetization. What does VR do for content? Is it value-adding? Definitely, it can be really value-adding, and we've seen that with some content that's been coming out. It is really immersive. You feel as if you're there. When you consume content, does the enjoyment get augmented if you're watching in the company of others? So if you can react to the reactions of others. So whether it's comedy, whether you're sitting on the promenade out there, you're watching people going by, making constructive comments about their appearance. Do you do that on your own, talking to yourself, or do you do that best with other people so that they can respond to the comments you're making about the dress sense of people from other countries? Right, so that's one view of entertainment. And this is another view over here. So this is the launch of the Galaxy S7, and you can see a very diverse group of tech journalists over there. And one of the questions you need to ask is this a utopian future? Or for some people, they go, is this dystopian? So will it be something that the mainstream will want to adopt as an approach? Right, another question is, so with virtual reality, you have immersive content. Now, one thing about that is you can feel as if you're teleported away to somewhere else. So normally what happens is if you're in London, it rains, and in Cannes, it's overcast. Today, the rules, I think, have been reversed. So we could feel as if it's London where it's sunny right now, or we could feel as if we were skiing downhill with virtual reality glasses. And what our brain tells us is that we're going downhill and going fast, but what our legs tell us is we are completely stationary. How do you rationalize both emotions? One way of testing it, actually, is if everyone tries out VR, then goes for a drive up and down the Croisette, and we can test empirically the impact on the sense of balance. Now, in terms of creating content, so a lot of the content created so far for VR is games, and it's based on digitized content. So it's a bit like when you think 3D content is easy to create from CGI 2D content. So a 3D version of Toy Story is relatively easy to create when it wasn't created in 3D in the first place. Now, in terms of capturing content in VR, this is a VR camera from a company in LA, and it's got 42 4K cameras in the full spec. So every frame is 1 gigapixel. And as you are a very knowledgeable audience, you will know that's the equivalent of 125 iPhone 6 photos. And if you've got a 30 FPS rate, then after a minute, you've captured the equivalent of 250,000 iPhone 6 photos. Where do you store the footage is one of the questions around this. If you're doing news, it's like a news studio, where would you put all the technicians and the cables and the producers who are on the phone to their friends when they should be producing the news? So, that's one of the other questions around how do you make this work. So you don't need to have one of these cameras. This is quite high-end. You can use something cheaper. So this is something which I believe the BBC has used, which is constantly under budget pressure. So what you've got here is 4 GoPros within a cradle, and underneath that you have a bicycle helmet. Underneath that you have a well, I guess you probably have an intern, but if there wasn't an intern, you have that person there. And what you get out of that, the kind of image, is this over here. So this is viewed obviously in 2D, and what you can see in there, you can get the entire British Army in that shot over here. So that's how good it is. Okay, right. And then a lot of you probably will have had an experience of VR from The Martian. And what we tend to find from asking this question, I think in 42 countries around the world of lots of clients, when we say, what do you like best about VR? They say The Martian, apart from roller coasters. So it's roller coasters and The Martian. But the thing about this, and what we're hearing is, a lot of the content that seems to be coming out, which resonates, is complementary as opposed to core. Now, is this an aberration, or is this something which will be basically the rule? Next slide. Right, so looking at the outlook, and this is what my fellow panelists over here will look at a lot more. So, and they can give you a lot more detail from what they are actually doing. So if we look at the outlook. Right, so one of the questions is, how do you make this really big? So this chart over here, and because we're accountants, we have to show bar charts, otherwise we are not allowed to proceed. So what the big blue number over here is the sales units for smartphones. So smartphones may actually tail off, but it's 1.5 billion units for smartphones. For games consoles, it's tiny. And the reason about why that's significant is if the only people buying VR headsets, good VR headsets, are people who play core games, the market is tiny, right? So it needs to go to the market who are buying TVs, at least, and ideally to the market who are buying smartphones. That's a kind of dimension you want to get it to. Now, another point, and then, sorry, can I have that one before that? Brilliant. So do any of you know what this is over here? I don't say an engineer, because that's easy. Anyone know what this is? So this is the first iteration of Google Glass. Took 2 hours to make. And so what you've got is a screen, sort of cobbled together from what was available. You've got a book as a cantilever or a counterweight, a bicycle helmet, and a core projector. Right? And if you remember Google Glass, the actual commercial version was a lot smaller than that. So if you went from that to Google Glass, you'd think, I am amazing, and it is an act of genius, which for the mainstream individual, however, was far too bulky to wear or far too intrusive. So one of the questions will be around equipment, and the human hardwired reaction to eyewear. So some of you have got glasses, some of you may have put contact lenses on, some of you may have had LASIK surgery. Basically, we try and remove eyewear if we can do. And so if you've got glasses, I expect most of you, looking at your glasses, you've got plastic lenses rather than glass lenses to save on weight. What weight would we tolerate on our eyes for 90 minutes is another question around the viability and ability to monetize in the market. So that's what I wanted to cover off, just to set the scene as to some of the questions which we've heard and which we've been looking at around the size of the VR market. And as I mentioned, our view for this year is $1 billion. But remember, there's also plenty of other views out in the market which are suggesting tens of billions of dollars, and they're from very trustworthy sources. Okay, so over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks, Paul. That was great. So what I'd like to do is just go down the line now, have everybody introduce themselves, and just tell us briefly what they do, what they're doing in this space, and then we'll start to talk about it. So, Mario, why don't we start with you?
Hi, my name is Mario Kenyon. I'm head of production at VRWerx. And we've been focusing on trying to connect certain VR pieces to the consumer. Working with a project now called Defrost, which is a 12-part series directed by Randall Kleiser. Each episode runs about 5 minutes long. We have 2 episodes done right now, and we're trying to figure out the proper way to present this to the world, the proper way to exhibit it, the proper platforms that it can be consumed on. Because it's not always going to be equal, and there's so many different headsets. There's so many different ways you can consume VR, as he pointed out, that there's a right fit for each individual project. And pretty soon going to be making our own content.
Hi, my name is Yip Sahmoud. I'm founder of Sahmoud Media and VR Cinema. Basically, we are, on one side, we have an agency specialized on virtual reality and augmented reality. And on the other side, we are the founders of the first virtual reality cinema in the world. And with a virtual reality cinema, you really should think about 50 people sitting in a room, about the same size as this, and all having a VR headset on their head, going to screenings of about 35 minutes. Which show 8 shows per day, every day around. We have that in Amsterdam and in Berlin, and in the last 3 months, 25,000 visitors.
Hey, I'm Alex Barder. I'm the co-managing partner of VRWerx. We're doing the Paranormal Activity VR game with Paramount Pictures. It's a license, so we own it. We're financing, we're distributing. It's a full AAA video game released on all platforms, HTC Vive, Oculus, and Sony PlayStation VR, releasing this summer and fall, depending on when the devices finally launch. Like PlayStation's launching in October. We are also in the live action business. We just shot what we think is one of the first feature-length VR movies ever. It was one of the biggest VR productions ever. We know that. It was 120 crew, 500 extras. We shot in Italy. It was pretty amazing. So we're in both spaces. It's a great space. We with Paranormal Activity, we have a demo that's out. We've had actually a couple demos that have been out. The first demo we did a deal with Paramount and AMC Theaters when Paramount was releasing their original their last Paranormal Activity movie back in October. We coincidentally were finishing a demo for our game, which we put in 15 cities around the U.S. In AMC lobbies. This was probably the biggest consumer-facing mass market VR event ever. It's sort of as a promotion for our game that's coming out. I have a little video that I'm happy to play of a nice young lady in one of these theaters in Boston who enjoyed our game a little bit.
Bravo. Hi, everyone. My name is Eugene Chung. I'm the CEO and founder of Penrose Studios. Penrose is a collection of artists, storytellers, engineers. We are a startup based in San Francisco. We're veterans of normal filmmaking as well as veterans of virtual reality. So we come from places such as Oculus, Pixar, DreamWorks, et cetera. And we're dedicated to making high-quality virtual reality stories inside of big virtual reality worlds. So we work in both the VR space as well as the AR space. My background comes from both the creative side as well as the analytical side. So I've been a film director the normal way before VR, and then I switched over to VR. And at the same time have been a coder and programmer since I was very young. Previous to founding Penrose, I was the head of film and media at Oculus. And while I was there, I created something called the Oculus Story Studio and made some of the first virtual reality narrative films. After the acquisition by Facebook, kicked it off on our own to create a new company, a new studio, and we're continuing to make VR films. We have 2 VR films that have been out there. The first is called The Rose and I. That was at Sundance just a few months ago, and it was featured at the festival there. Our second one, called Allumette, is what had its world premiere at Tribeca only a few weeks back. And that's our second film, and we actually have a video talking about it, giving us a little perspective on it.
Stories are the way that we as humans have figured out how to transmit learning in a culture over generations. When I saw virtual reality reemerge a few years ago, and I finally saw it come to fruition, I realized that this is, in fact, that next major medium of human storytelling.
There's that human element that's really what drives everything. It's all about bringing the human into the virtual world and trying to wipe away the technology and bring in the humanity.
Allumette is a a story about love and sacrifice. It's an incredibly, deeply personal story and a deeply personal experience. And as you see Alumet's story unfold, you start to realize what's happened to her, and your empathy for her only grows.
At Penrose Studios, we have a native VR creation tool that's really helpful for artists to work directly in virtual reality to create our assets.
We can't rely on the camera angle to help compose a story and help influence the audience. We actually have to design a set that could be seen from different angles. The set becomes a character to me.
This medium is so new that it's almost like we're trying to paint a picture, but we're also trying to design the paintbrush at the same time.
Some of the challenges with VR have been some of the most exciting aspects of VR.
I feel truly lucky and blessed to be working with the incredible people at Penrose Studios. And as people around the world see Alumet, I hope they fall in love with her in the same way that we have.
Thank you, guys. So, as Paul's touched on in his opening address, and we all know this, there's skepticism and there's a lot of excitement about this. And I don't think there's anybody here on the stage who hasn't thought very hard about why is this going to work, what are the opportunities. And we're going to talk about what the monetizing opportunities are as well. But I think we have to touch a little bit on production and what works and what doesn't work, etc. Yip, if I can just start with you, with what you do at VR Cinema, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about the length of the movies you show. Why does that seem to be working? What reactions are you getting from users?
Yeah. So basically, we show people a 35-minute program. We see 30 minutes, 35 minutes as kind of the maximum that people find still enjoyable to watch, because at that point your brain starts to get that much impulses that it just gets tired. I mean, if you're saying like why VR also, and every time when we have people there, every hour we have people coming in, and it's always this new experience of stepping into the new world and really experiencing something that which is almost just in your mind, or just a beautiful thing. And I think that's what's, for me, that's the most exciting thing. And it's like really creating this total new market and industry almost. And that's also a challenge, by the way, as a VR cinema with looking for content. We totally need to remake the industry of distribution, of content producers, looking throughout the whole world to find the right content, because in our cinema we try to renew the content every month. And so what we see now is most projects are maximum 10 minutes. So we try to combine different movies to create a beautiful package for people to, for instance, have a documentary night or have a horror night. So that's how we try to combine things. But the market really needs producers who start producing 30-minute productions.
And, Alex, tell us a bit about your game. I should say, full disclosure, I've sampled a bit of this in LA.
Yeah, it's fun.
I started here, and 10 minutes later I was crouched in a corner of the room like 10 yards away. It's very immersive. What have you learned from the making of this? What's working, what's not working?
Well, the one thing that I've learned, the one thing I know for sure is we don't know anything, right? Is that the reality is, and while I totally hear you with the 30 minutes and everything else, the one thing about VR, it's a brand new platform, it's a brand new thing. It's like somebody just invented a TV, right? And we don't know how long the content should be. On TV, you see content that's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 2 hours, a mini series, 8 hours, whatever. So for us, the one thing that we've learned is, it's all brand new and there are no rules, and it requires innovation from everybody, not just from a technology standpoint, but really from a storytelling standpoint. It's just another platform. There's a lot of hype about VR, but at the end of the day, it's just another platform. In the beginning of time, people told stories from a father to son, and then they started to draw paintings on caves, and there was a print that was invented, and there was eventually theater and radio and TV and film and now internet. This is just another platform, and it's another platform to tell stories. And that's, when you boil it down, that's what we all do anyways, right? So it doesn't really it's great, but let's calm it down a bit and just realize it's an amazing opportunity to innovate a new language, but it's what it is.
And Mario, some opening thoughts from you, what you've learned?
Yeah, so I've actually been studying the science behind VR ever since I've been interested in it for a couple of years now. I was up at Stanford at their virtual human interaction lab, trying to figure out what's really going on in the brain. And like Alex said, it's just another platform to tell a story, but what's unique about virtual reality is, unlike when you read a book and you see letters and you put them into words, they form sentences, and then you create the story in your mind, in VR, your brain is automatically connected to it, and it achieves presence. And so you can tell some incredibly impactful stories, very, very emotional, in a very short amount of time. And we don't know the right format. Right now, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but as people get more accustomed to this, who's to say you can't spend 2 hours in here comfortably once the hardware kind of allows it. But it's really interesting to see the different reactions to virtual reality depending on how it was presented to them. For example, if somebody's in an experience and they're watching Defrost and they're standing up, where in the experience you're sitting down, and they're in a loud room and there's background noise and they're distracted, their brain can only focus on one thing, so it's not going to be fully immersed in the story. Versus if you kind of lead somebody and tell them, sit down, it's a quiet room, tell them to put their hands on their knees, their brain can connect to the story, and they have a much more powerful experience. So it's really going to be how people embrace this, and letting everybody know that there's a right way and a wrong way to experience virtual reality. And I think everybody up here is trying to make sure that we do it in the proper way.
So, Eugene, first of all, how long is Alumet? And then let's go into also telling us how you think you're going to make money from this, and we'll all ask everybody else too.
Sure, absolutely. So Alumet is about 20 minutes long. It's a fully immersive, real-time CG world, as well as a story. So it's more like a movie like Pixar, which is 3D animated, as opposed to like a 360 video. The advantage of this is that it is, when you have something of that type, you're able to actually move around in the world, something called positional tracking, which is sort of your ability to move and track your head in Euclidean space. And that adds to what we call presence, which in many ways is the holy grail of virtual reality. Presence is basically defined by that unmistakable feeling of being someplace else. And we think that with that sort of 3D positional tracking, you're able to get that. So Alumet's about 20 minutes long. When we kicked it off, 20 minutes long. When we kicked it off, we thought to ourselves, what is the length of time, right? People talk to hear about what the length of time is, and everyone's kind of started off with minute-long pieces several years ago. Then we got into 5-minute-long pieces, and now a big question is, how long can we be in there? And with Alumet, we wanted to sort of extend that and see how long we could go. And because for animated films, it costs quite a lot of money, speaking of monetization, to make these things. And so for the thing of its type, it's definitely breaking the boundaries of what we've seen before, which is more like 5 to 10 minutes. So it's like we're Charles Dickens, right? Charles Dickens knew he wanted to write these long books, but he had to start by sort of writing them serialized little by little. And with VR, as people talked about, we're really trying to figure out what the proper length of time for a story should be. It's kind of like the beginning of film, right? The first Lumiere brothers train coming into La Ciotat station was about 45 seconds long. Then about 10 years later, we had the Great Train Robbery, which is about 11 minutes long. And then a little bit after that, people figured out that 90 minutes or so kind of works for film. And for VR, we're actually still trying to figure that out. We know it's going to be longer than 20 minutes after our experiment with Alumet. In terms of how to make money, I think thought that was a great slide presentation to kick things off, talking about how monetization is going to go and how it's going to develop. I think right now there clearly is no audience, right? People like Goldman Sachs, UBS, Piper Jaffray, Wall Street is estimating these big numbers. The biggest number that I've seen is a $150 billion industry by 2020, which I don't necessarily buy into because I think it's quite high. But just to put that number into perspective, 150 billion is 50% larger than the entire U.S. advertising market, and the U.S. advertising market is dominated by big groups like WPP, Omnicom Group, these big companies that have been around for decades. And some people are saying that there's going to be this large market, and because of the way the industry dynamics are going, it'll likely be dominated by entirely new players. So in Silicon Valley, it's been attractive. VR has been an attractive and interesting place for people to invest. We've been fortunate enough that we're only a few months old, and we've just raised an $8.5 million seed round, which is the largest seed round in VR to date. And that's enabled us to sort of kick things off and start creating content. Again, we're only a few months into things, but it's a great way to kick things off. And what our plan to do is to grow sustainably with the market, and actually in many ways help to both work with and invent some of the business models around it. And I think as talked about in some of the presentations and comments earlier, just like the creative side, you have to be creative about tackling that from a creative perspective. From a business model perspective, I suspect that we will have to invent completely new things for us to figure out what's going to work in virtual reality.
How soon will Alumet, come to market, as it were? What's the price point?
So we haven't decided the price point yet or the release date. It will be later in 2016. We will be a PlayStation VR launch title as well. So that shows at least that's October 2016. So it'll be that time or before. We haven't launched a price on this, but The Rose and I, our first film, is for free, at least for a limited time. And actually, a lot of the things in what's called the entertainment category in the Oculus Store, for example, that they're free or free for a limited time. So my first film, Lost, when I was at Oculus, is currently free. Henry, the second film by Story Studio, is free, and Rose and I, which is at least my next film, and the one prior to Alumet, is currently free. Now, of course, we can't eat on free forever, but in these early days of the market, it's interesting. We have to figure out what works. We initially actually had priced, speaking of monetization, the Rose and I, not because we needed the money, but because we wanted to judge elasticity of demand. And we actually figured out that, so in the early stages, we figured that consumers are pretty inelastic, but we did have a vocal sort of group of people that said, well, they had some pretty hard thoughts about how things should be priced. So there's some games in the Steam store, for example, that have recently dropped their prices, right, from like $50 to $30. And there's this really big, interesting period of figuring out what a VR experience should be priced at that we're still sort of in the midst of.
Before we go on, I want to come to you next, Alex. Would it be instructive if we just told everybody how to watch VR? Just talk about Steam Store and how you can watch things. Would that be helpful to everybody? How can you see VR? Can you explain some of these virtual places you go to watch VR right now? Anybody?
First, you need a headset, or you go to a theater where you can access a headset. But
That's the best.
Which is the best, absolutely the best. But if you happen to buy your own headset, there are platforms. So Oculus has a store. HTC has something called Viveport, which has a store. Also, you can buy things on a platform called Steam, which in the film world, and my whole background is in the film world. So this is news to me. But in the gaming world, Steam is like the iTunes of gaming. It has over 130 million people right now with credit cards in the system that monetizes. And if you're buying independent games or even big games, you're buying them on Steam. It's all download. So there's all kinds of ways to buy it, and you're seeing new platforms come up. It seems like every VR startup that has some kind of a platform play. So you're going to see way more platforms that are going to shoot up and then eventually go out of business, because what will happen is the Netflix will come in eventually, even though they're saying they're not interested, they will be, and all the other players, Amazon and everybody else. So it's basically the same platforms that you're going to see in the film or the world or in digital, but it'll just be in VR. And of course, Google Store and the iTunes Store will have VR content as well.
Yeah, that's for mobile VR. You can already access VR content on your phone, and you can plug it into a cardboard or any other type of device. And in the future, as our phones you have more storage capability and the resolution increases, you're going to see that you can have some pretty powerful experiences just on your phone, and a direct-to-consumer model, just having these apps where you can kind of understand who's watching, how long they're watching, analytics on the back end. This is all going to be very possible in the future as well.
And Hulu is, I think, the one for cinematic VR who is stepping at the moment the most into it and is quite buying all licenses.
Hulu?
Hulu, yeah.
Yep.
So, Alex, what's the price point going to be for the game, or can you share a rough?
It's a great thought. I mean, so do you need the mic? I can't see on the mic. So in general, the problem with pricing games is that the price anywhere from $4.99 to the high $65 sometimes, $70, just depending on the game.
Traditional video games.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So since we're making a big game in VR, do we price it at that level? No. So our price point is somewhere in the $20 to $60 range. That's a huge range. I think for monetization, we all need to look at the video game business, the subscription VOD business. I think we need to look at that's what the interesting thing is about VR is we need to start looking at other business models and other monetization models and pulling them into VR. And that's the problem. I think the VR game guys are used to the VR game monetization model. I think the film guys are used to the film monetization model. And I think we need to cross all these and understand how all these models work and understand a way to coalesce all these models into one model that makes sense ultimately for the audience. It's the same audience ultimately, but how do you make it so that people are comfortable paying a price for what they're watching? And it's relative. I'm not a fan of free content. I think it's bad for the business, respectfully. And by the way, I totally get it because for us, the foundation of our whole business is monetization. There's a lot of companies in the VR space that will do marketing experiences and brand experiences that, some brand hires a VR company to make some VR installation somewhere, and that's great. For us, it was never interesting to us because the only way it's going to scale to the kind of numbers you're talking about is by actually having a monetization model that's sustainable and grows. And there's all kinds of opportunities. For us, as the low-hanging fruit was the video game business because there's already a model. People are used to buying content. They go to Steam and they pay X dollars and they get the content. It's the same thing. As a second fold, the live action business, that'll be a different model, right? And it's all different, but it all should sort of work together and make sense.
Yeah. And Mario, do you mind?
Yeah. What's interesting about that is, like you said, with the video game market, it's there and they're used to buying stuff. When we talk about cinema, people aren't used to putting a phone on their face and watching their favorite movie. That's just not what people are used to. So how can you build that audience? And I think it's going to be having these content creators, having these amazing storytellers come to this space and exhibit these incredibly powerful experiences that maybe you can go to a theater and see, and then you talk about it. And that's the way that word has spread, that, oh my God, you have to try this experience. It's incredible. Because I've seen people try VR and they just don't get it. They're not into it. But when they go to an event, they go to a festival and they talk about it and they really figure out what's going on and the true connection that the brain has to these pieces. That's when the aha moment hits and they're like, okay, I'm going to go back, I'm going to buy one, I'm going to try this thing out. Because without kind of leading them down the pathway, they're not going to find it themselves, is what I've come to realize.
Yeah. I mean, we quite have stepped into the physical distribution model, and I think there's a big opportunity to bring people together, to give them really an experience. I also rather actually talk about VR experiences than VR movies, because I think in the end it's about having an experience. And if you think about the online distribution model, I think the biggest danger of the market is the guys who will give it away for free now, because the whole market is actually, or the consumers are thinking like YouTube, like I can get everything for free and I don't want to pay for anything now. And if we...
Sorry, it'll devalue it.
It will,
And that's the problem.
That's the problem.
What the damage will do. So when he's trying to monetize in theater and they can go get an abundance of content for free, it devalues it, and it's too early to devalue it. It needs to be valuable, otherwise people don't value it.
Yeah, and also if you look to the online model, if you can make it for free, then you need the advertisers in. And advertisers also need to make special content in the end to have it over there. And actually, it's funny because we don't see real VR advertisement, which is like pre-rolls or something like that. The market is still. Although I speak to a lot of brands who are super interested in it, but they just boost out their own apps and really give experiences themselves to consumers. But I think it's on one of these three parts. But as an industry, we would really help ourselves to monetize our stuff and value it in the way it should be.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about numbers for your business. Yep.
Yeah. So basically, people can just buy a ticket. It's a €12.50 ticket price point that we took. We kind of look to the same price point as a normal cinema would do. Actually, our model quite looks like traditional cinema, also with how much goes to the content providers, a food and beverage concept around it, and just as said previously. We had about 25,000 visitors so far in Berlin and Amsterdam, and in the end, it's also people because a lot of people ask me also, like, can this model of a physical thing, can that exist? Like Paul in his introduction said, like, why would you be watching something on your own while you're in a group of people? But in the end, I think when you go back to cinema, it goes all about having good technology and a great experience because of that, having a great content and exclusive content, and that's one of our most important things, and then having a great night out. And what we actually see is that people come into that room and having a joint experience, and when they switch off their headsets, they watch each other and they made this journey together. And it's all about having this shared experience, which actually in a normal cinema is also the case, because during the normal movies you get really irritated when people start talking or debating about the movie that they are seeing. So that's also all behind. So I think that in that way, we can have a future with that.
Yeah.
So I'd like to respond to some of the comments on it being free, because there's been two of them. I agree a lot with what you guys said, and I think obviously monetization is an important concept, and that's what this entire panel is about. What's really interesting right now is that VR creators of all types, whether games or films, are in a bit of a dilemma, because they don't want to charge too low, because then what happens is you devalue it. It's what's called a reference pricing, right? Any new market, you create a reference price, and then you're kind of stuck there for a while. And then on the flip side, they don't want to have it be too high, because the way that VR experience is now, I mean, we forget this industry in this new iteration. In other words, this resurgence of this industry is only about 2 or 3 years old. So it's not like we've had a lot of time to make really big pieces of AAA content or blockbuster movies. So the issue is that you don't want to, make your consumer angry by charging too much, and at the same time, you don't want to charge too low of a reference price. Right, so the mobile business is actually a great example of where too low of a reference price was created. So the Apple when it created its iPhone, it had a 99-cent reference price per track, and that came from sort of the iPod and the music store. And then somehow that went over to apps as well, and it's probably caused billions of dollars of losses for app makers in many ways if you were to add up some of the things that are going on there. And so I think a lot of VR people, including some of the people on this panel and including myself, are concerned about establishing too low of a reference price.
Yeah, but what I think,
the problem is,
what I think is really interesting when you look on because we talk with a lot of producers, and a lot of them are funded, probably like yourself, from a San Francisco or Silicon Valley based, where you have tech investors going into a new technology. And when we look where these guys come from, it's mainly from the online business models, where it's all about having a high amount of numbers coming in. And also, I think that's the main KPIs that you probably will be looking at, like how can I get views and see retention rates on that. And which is a different kind of investor thinking probably than people more from the movie industry.
It's definitely true that LA and Silicon Valley are different in the way that they think. I think for us, we're open. I mean, it's not like I've got my investors saying, "Hey, what are your KPIs this month or next month?" I know nobody cares in this year at the very least, because everyone knows it's just getting kicked off. I do agree there's a difference in culture. However, the reason why this kind of pricing thing matters is because already several companies have had sort of backlashes on the price of their content. So something called Job Simulator, popular game, Alchemy Labs, a pretty good game creator, they had to lower their price on Steam because of some pretty big outbursts of how much they were pricing. I think it was like $39.99, so they dropped it to $29.99. But there was a McKinsey study that said that most reference prices are too low, right? So I completely kind of get what you guys are saying. The reason why free is the better in between is because if you're for free and you say free for a limited time only, which a lot of the content out there that says they're free is that then you don't establish a reference price, right?
Yeah,
it's
but
a little
if
bit
it's free,
like pushing across, but you say it's not $1, it's not $5, not $30. It's free for now, but let's figure this out together.
Yeah, but if it's free now, why would somebody want to pay $5 tomorrow? If it's free.
If it's free for a limited time for the several thousand people that have the early riffs, and then you can reprice it. And you make it clear that it's free. And this is something that I've talked about a lot with the platform guys, because they are also under the same gun as well. And they're like, well, at least free gives you more, you can go from free to 20 easier than you can go from $1 to $20, right? So that's the interesting conundrum.
And the experience has got to be extraordinary, right? The first time experience has got to be so good that those guys will want to pay.
Let's hope so, yeah.
Right? That's got to be incredible.
That's our goal.
Can we just define KPR quickly? KPI?
KPI is just key performance indicators. So things like users and things that you were talking about.
Mario, you wanted to say something?
What we're doing with Defrost is we're waiting until all the episodes are complete and going to see where kind of the market is then. 'Cause we were originally thinking about possibly releasing for free, trying to build the audience like that, and then it's the same kind of back and forth of what's the right thing to do. And I still don't think that we know, but I don't think free is terrible at the moment, but we're not going to release it for free right now. And
how much?
When we have 12 episodes done, it's going to be running about 60 minutes. We're thinking a single-time fee for all 12 episodes. And we haven't come up with a price yet, but we think that's better than charging per episode. We have intentions on working with Defrost on season 2 and seeing where that goes. But so one thing that's been really interesting is I've been exhibiting Defrost on a synchronization box. So I was just at the World VR Forum in Crans, Montana, and I had 15 people up on a stage, and we put a projector behind them so you could see what they were looking at. And we had a very decent-sized audience of watching these people watching VR. I incorporated smells into the experience too, just kind of have more of an event and achieve presence. And the audience watching the people in VR couldn't have been more interested. They were loving it. They were eating it up. They were, almost having more fun than the people in VR. So that was, to me, that was really interesting to look at this kind of new event and this new spectacle. And I think it might be things like those that really get the word out to people that this is a really remarkable way of experiencing content. And, I just worry that if there's not more kind of theaters, there's not more big events, and people are just watching in their home, we're going to lose this sense of community and this kind of talking about it and sharing your experience, what you liked, what you didn't like, which is something I really find key in people's experience with VR.
Yeah, so it's funny, on that point, what we're thinking, there's going to be a big resurgence in arcades. So just the whole notion of a VR arcade, because it is expensive to buy the equipment. If you're not a core gamer, if you don't have a high-powered computer, but you want to experience VR, an experiential thing like your theater, or the whole notion of an arcade or that kind of installation is we think is going to come back, where you can try a lot of different kinds of games. The Birdly thing that's coming over here is not something that you're necessarily going to buy at home. You're not going to have this contraption at home, but you might go to the arcade and you might pay $4.99, $5.99, $8.99 to play that. And
what's that called?
Birdly. It's this thing over here which is pretty cool. Where you're flying like a bird and you're flapping your you're flapping your arms, and it's really cool. I haven't seen it recently. I saw it in Sundance about 2 years ago, and it was cool then. I'm sure it's even cooler now. But it's not something you're going to do at home.
You can crash into buildings, which is a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
When else are you going to be able to crash into a building and just go like, oh, that was awesome?
Can I just go back to the monetization? Because I think that's really, really important that you get that right. Because when you look at mobile games, you had companies 8 years ago which made fortunes from mobile games. And the market, as Eugene is saying, has become enormous. It's $35 billion. But the average revenue per game is $40,000. And then you've got the PC platform and the console platform where monetization is millions of dollars per game. But there's 800,000 mobile game titles out there. And for a lot of the games, only 2% pay any money. So a difference in the dynamic for mobile games is people go for the freemium model, and 2% for a good game pay for any content. And they pay like $30, $40, sometimes $100 per month. You won't get that dynamic, I don't think, from VR.
Why? Why not?
Because...
Why wouldn't you get that dynamic? Because
Right, okay, well, if you can get into a dynamic whereby you get people who are locked into a game, they feel they have to pay to participate. So like Real Racing, for example, as one game, I know people who have been paying up to $1,000 per month to play in that game, because what they want is that. But then cinematic content, naming pieces of cinematic content where people go, I'll pay $1,000 for that. It's a different proposition. Yeah. So trying to conflate the two...
Except that in the gaming business, and this is different than the film business, is they know their audience. So the game business owns their audience, and they have a relationship, and they keep on upselling them additional levels and new content. The film business, and this is probably the reason that the independent film business is contracting as much as it is they don't know who their audience is. By the way, the studio business is the same way, but at least they get a much bigger bite up front. But in terms of the game business, they have a relationship with their audience, and they keep on upselling. So they don't need to charge money up front, because they know if you want to buy a virtual suit of armor, then you're going to pay $5.99 or whatever. And that model works, and there's no reason why that model couldn't work in the VR business.
But I think in the end it's pretty dangerous to throw the cinematic VR business and the gaming VR business all on one hope, because it's a total different target group.
Right. Alex, you mentioned about the feature that you're doing. And a lot of people I'm talking to are saying features in VR, we don't think it's going to work, and a few people do think, you're taking a bet that it will. What do you think is going to be the selling point?
Listen, I think I can't really talk about what we did specifically, but in general, if the content is compelling enough, then people are going to watch whatever for however long it is. If the content's boring, then they're going to be in there for a short amount of time. But if it's compelling and you're engaged, then you're going to be in there as long as you can. For us, the way we built it, it's playable as a full-length feature. But if somebody wants to take a break, you can take a break. It's chaptered as well. Yeah, like yours. So for us, we give people an option, but the goal is to let people watch it all the way through. The challenge, of course, is that technology right now on mobile is such that the phones can overheat if you're on for too long. That's a limitation. Of course, we're launching on the Vive and PlayStation VR and Oculus as well. But for us, it's if the content is there, then the people are going to watch it. It's the same like anything else. Like a game. Just by the way, just as an example, a lot of people said, just in terms of the VR game space. You can't have a game that's more than 10, 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. People won't be in there long. People have been in our game for 3-4 hours. Our game is a 3 to 10 hour game, and we've had people in there who are testing the game that just for their own fun are in there for 3 hours just playing the game, more than I would do.
But I think also
I love our game, by the way. It's fantastic.
I think also for the length of movies, it's more up to that we need really new directors, a new way of directing also to make it make sense that you are for such a long period also in that movie. And what we really see, and I don't know if there are a lot of movie directors in here, but we see in general that movie directors are extremely bad in VR. And that you need much more theater people to step into it, because they are much more used to make that whole environment and really are used to attract you as a viewer, really to watch from the one to the other point without doing all kind of cuts all the time.
I disagree. I think if you're a good storyteller and you really understand the space that you're working in, you can tell a really amazing story. Randall Kleiser directed Grease. He did theater right before he did Defrost, and it's incredible what you said, that theater really leads to your understanding of how to direct using lighting, using sounds, kind of theater in the round, but opposite. But I really think that it's just anybody who loves this space can come in and tell a really amazing story. We just need more people to come in and try it out, because there's an infinite amount of realities, an infinite amount of possibilities in virtual reality. And just more people need to come in and expose it to the world so people understand that there is a piece of content for them, that they can find an experience that really does open up their eyes and realize that a lot is possible in this space.
So, it's funny, what we've seen a lot is people who are making movies in VR, live action, that don't really inherently understand VR. This is a 360 environment. So if you're going to make a movie, by the way, and I'm not one saying there's any rules, but this is our personal opinion. If you're going to make a movie in VR, then it should be the story should unfold around you. If the whole story unfolds on a plane in front of you, why be in VR? If you don't need to see all around you, if you don't need to be able to, if the story's not unfolding all the way, why be in VR? Just make a regular movie. That's fine. The problem is VR is hip and cool, and there are panels and everything else. The whole things that which are whatever. But at the end of the day, if it's not meant, don't make something in VR if it's not made for VR or 360.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that comment. And I also agree with the prior comment that actually most film directors don't make good VR directors. I think there's some exceptions. I'm sure Randall is one. But it kind of goes back to 100 years ago. It wasn't like people like Oscar Wilde, who were the big sort of people in either the stage play or the opera that became the good film directors. It became completely new players like the Lumiere brothers, Méliès, and D.W. Griffiths. Because it was so new as an art form, and VR is the same as well, a new art form, that you basically need to invent new rules. And people who are too hardened to the rules of film and cinema oftentimes have a really tough time. This is something I've seen empirically, not just something I'm guessing at. They have a really hard time kind of trying to figure out what to do with this new medium. When I ran the first Oculus Connect, the big sort of Oculus conference in our first year, I ran the first film and storytelling panel, and we had Academy Award-winning film directors. We had people from high-level, C-level execs at Disney. And I remember one of the guys turned to the audience. It was about 1,000 people, all early-stage developers, mostly in VR. And he basically was like, "Well, the beauty of VR is that whether you're a $200+ billion company like Disney or two guys in a garage, the playing field is basically leveled. And in many ways, because you don't have preconceived notions if you're two guys in a garage, you might actually have even a slight edge." And I think that's part of the exciting part of this entire medium.
Well, we're touching on that. Following up on that, what can you tell us about what you know about the Hollywood studios and what they're doing? Because we understand that they are not jumping in right now, but they're watching with interest. What does it take for them to get on board, and what are they doing right now?
Yeah, during my time as head of film and media at Oculus, part of my role was to go and interface with Hollywood. I gave a lot of the studios their first Oculus Rifts back both pre-acquisition and sort of post-acquisition. And a lot of them were incredibly interested, but at the same time, there's a number of things. I mean, obviously, The Martian was spearheaded by Fox, and there's a number of little experiences, mostly driven by the marketing departments of these firms, trying to say, we have a movie and we want to go and market it. And now we're starting to get into more full experiences, that are sort of standalone in and of themselves. I guess the big question, right, the big sort of multi-billion-dollar question is whether these will be the firms that become the new sort of, they'll be able to go and adapt to this medium, or whether it will be entirely new players. If you're asking a guy like me, Silicon Valley guy, we always talk about disruptive innovation. It's like a big cliche in Silicon Valley. But I think in many ways, VR especially is definitely a disruptive innovation. And according to the rules of that, basically what happens is when you have a truly disruptive innovation, it's difficult for very large companies to go and adapt to the existing, their existing sort of resources, processes, and priorities. And so you would expect, and this happens industry after industry, you'd expect new players in virtual and augmented reality space to dominate. And I saw this time and time again. There'd be so many interested people, interested executives in Hollywood, and they'd do little experiments, but trying to really go and work through a Hollywood studio and make that sort of a key prime focus, I think it's going to be very difficult over the coming years. So I expect that multi-$100 billion plus industry to come on the content side to be dominated mostly by new players. Just like EA Sports didn't dominate mobile games, it was new players like Rovio.
Except that the studios will come in and they'll buy those guys, or they'll come in and do deals with those guys. So we work obviously a lot with the studios, with most of the studios, and what we've seen is every one of them has interest in VR. They all know about it. They're all, we met with the strategic planning people of half the studios, if not more, and they're aware of it, and they're trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do. What is the revenue model, which is the whole point of this panel as well. The studios are having that conversation right now, every single day. We've spoken to them a lot about what our ideas are about what monetization is, how we're monetizing our content. The great thing about the studios is they have a lot of fantastic IP. Initially in our business, we chose to work with the existing IP because for a new technology like VR, people are going to reach for what they know. And so it's an easier sell to them. And so because of that, the studios know that. I think the studios are spending a lot of time with like you're saying, with marketing experiences, but I think you're going to see more and more original content that's created by the studios. I don't think that the existing filmmakers, the existing crop of experienced directors, the Spielbergs of the world, are going to care enough about VR to really devote the kind of creative energy you really need to make something truly amazing, as opposed to working with somebody else. Of course, you go to Spielberg and he's saying, I'm interested in VR, and that's great. But at the end of the day, it's going to be some 14-year-old kid in a garage that totally innovates and makes some movie in 360 that blows everybody away, and everybody goes, wow, this kid is the next Spielberg in VR. And that's what we think will happen, and you'll see that over and over again. I don't know that it's going to come out of Silicon Valley either, because the problem with Silicon Valley is it's a lot of engineers, a lot of guys like that who are coming into VR, and also on the Hollywood side, by the way, it's a lot of SFX, visual effects guys that are coming into VR. What you really need are true storytellers that abandon everything they know about filmmaking and start from the ground up, and that's the key. And the studios will come in.
Good point. Mario.
Yeah, kids now, they're on a phone, they're on an iPad at a very, very young age, and they understand this virtual space, and they understand playing games on your phone way better than we ever could, because their brains were wired that way. And so, as this new generation comes in and they get a hold of this technology, they're going to do things that we can't even imagine right now, just because their brains are wired differently, and they're going to make connections that we just never saw coming. So I'm excited for these younger kids to get their hands on some equipment, and actually next year working with some students on getting them some VR cameras and teaching them how to work in this space. That'll be up in Marin. So I'm excited about this younger generation coming into this space.
Very cool. Tell us a little bit about how you see the whole arcade and the communal experience growing.
I mean, we have been quite looking into the arcade room kind of experience, physical, but on the gaming side. The only thing, it's still really difficult to make that business model work. So we did quite some calculations on it, but especially because you need a longer, to make it really make sense to have a VR gaming experience, you need a little bit longer time than just the 1 minute kind of thing, and all the time $1 you put into it, and $1 again, and $1 again. So we didn't figure it out yet. We've been looking into it, although I think that the market, and that's also what we do with our VR cinema, we really believe that the market needs to go beyond the roller coaster experience, because actually I think that the roller coaster was one of the most baddest things that came to VR, because it makes everybody sick, and it gives everybody that same first thought about VR, like I'm gonna be sick, and we now.
What's a little vomit between friends? What's the problem?
Yeah, well, and we really need to go into that entertainment field and into that storytelling field. So that's why we really focus with our cinema and also our productions actually really on storytelling and going beyond that. But I think there will be an arcade hall kind of a thing.
If you want to look at, by the way, at the future of the experiential in arcade business, you go to China.
Yeah.
In China, they're investing a ton in arcades, in amusement parks and theme parks that are VR theme parks. There's all these internet cafes. There's millions of these internet cafes, whether legal or illegal. The HTCs of the world are supporting those in droves. They're installing 100,000 Vives in internet cafes right now. That's where you're going to see it's not a full arcade experience, but what they're doing in China and what they're doing elsewhere is they're taking over old movie theaters in Korea, exactly, where they're converting old theaters, and actually they're building them from scratch, and they're creating esports arenas, which is where people are doing competitive gaming and everything else. But within those, they have VR arcades and other things like that, because if you want to get an 18-year-old kid away from his computer or his iPhone or whatever it is into an environment, it's not going to be a movie theater anymore. Those guys don't necessarily watch movies in theaters anymore. They're on their phones. They want something that they can be social with their friends, whether it's in person or over the internet somehow.
Yeah, right. Shall we, guys? Anybody got questions? Let's see what people want to. Yeah, we've got a microphone coming round. Or
Hi guys, thank you. This is super interesting. I think I've been thinking as you've been speaking about what other games there are that exist in a 360 world, and of course one of the answers is, well, everything that exists in a physical environment. And I think if escape rooms are a viable business model, then clearly it would seem that doing VR games together is. And from the storytelling perspective, obviously live role-playing games on the avant-garde side have something to teach us. But I think the cultural expectation is, as you're saying, that we're going to be able to share these stories and these worlds. Basically, we're waiting for the holodeck. That's going to be the killer app. So if I may ask you to look into the future, how are we 5 years away, 10 years away, 20 years away from the actual shareable, real interactive storytelling space? And I realize there are bandwidth issues that are enormous, so let's not say when can we do holodeck on our mobiles and play together multiplayer like that, but when can we do it at all?
I think it depends on what you mean by the holodeck, because there's a lot of meanings, right? I mean, as a Star Trek fan, you think of the holodeck and you think of it as a complete recreation of physical space. I think the biggest problem with the holodeck, or actually recreating humans, is that that's a very, very difficult problem. So there's something called light field technologies that allowed you to volumetric capture space. So for example, somebody over in San Francisco, where I'm from, could be sitting here where you are watching this. That's very, very difficult to do, because human capture is hard, right? You got to get it basically exactly right. Otherwise, you feel this thing called the uncanny valley, right? Where something's almost human, but not quite. And there's sort of this revulsion that people have when they see something like that. But at the same time, on the flip side, I think in many ways the holodeck is here now, in the sense that in VR, one of the biggest things I've learned, and one of the things that we kind of have almost plastered as on the walls as a principle, is in VR, simplicity goes a long way. And when I first tried, the early prototypes that was coming out of Oculus when I first joined, what was interesting is that you see, there was this one room where you basically saw an experience of yourself in a mirror, and you were a cube, just a simple cube with 2 dots for eyes, and that was it. And basically you moved your head around and it followed your movement. And there was something really real about that, right? It wasn't a human, it didn't look human, it was very simple, and it was very powerful. There's something Oculus has created called Toy Box, which I think is really incredible, even though it doesn't look human. It just looks like a digital representation, an avatar, and that's fine. At Penrose, we're creating similar stuff like that. And we're finding that you don't have to have human representations. It can be a CG environment, and it works pretty well.
And it's just the Toy Box. It's so you're sitting in both in total different rooms, and but together with somebody, you are in the virtual world. And the way how real that is, and how amazing the way how you can feel emotions, and because you can also talk together. And when I was doing that, and when they switch it off, it actually goes partly. So they first switch off your sounds, and then your movement stops, and then you actually really step up. And it feels really like, after being 20 minutes in there, it feels really like they're cutting an arm off you, and that you're still screaming to the person opposite to you, who's in a total different space. So yeah, the way how that works with your brain is amazing, and I have really high expectations.
Yeah, at Stanford, I did this demo where they select from about 13 different avatars, and it's something that kind of resembles you, and you have some controls, and you're looking at this big mirror. For me, they choose brown-haired guy in a suit, dancing around. After about 5 minutes, they say, look down. So you're no longer looking at the mirror. Then I look back up again, and they turn my avatar into a hypersexualized woman. And I knew what had happened, that they had changed my avatar, but it took my brain a long time to connect and start moving again, because after about 5 minutes, they said this thing called body transference happens, where your brain can connect to this avatar, and it could live the rest of its life as this avatar. So when it changed the avatar, it changed my entire world, my entire perception of myself. And it took me a while to start moving again. So, it doesn't have to be photoreal. The uncanny valley is real, and our brains now can connect and identify with people who don't look like humans, and that's also really exciting.
Yeah, listen, the future is now. So it's all doable now. All the technology is there. It just requires somebody with enough courage, and if you to use the Yiddish word chutzpah, to go do it. When we did Paranormal Activity, everybody said, "What are you talking about? You're not going to do a full AAA game with the way you move. We have a 12,000 square foot house, 4 stories. It's a massive game." Everybody said, "What are you, crazy? You have to stand in one place and you got to spin around and you have to shoot things. That's VR." We said, "No freaking way. We're going to go for it. We're just going to go do what nobody else is doing." And we weren't really paying attention to what anybody else said. We just did it. So everything you're talking about is achievable right now. It's just somebody's got to just do it. And by the way, there's plenty of money in VR right now. So people who are trying to finance movies and everything else, you're wasting your time because it's a big pain in the ass.
But just to give a little future prediction, I predict that you will have a blend in 5 to 10 years between augmented reality and virtual reality.
I think you're a year away, if anything. I think all the tech is there. I think augmented reality, you're going to see the tech accelerate super fast.
But what I mean is that you have your glasses on, which normally you use as augmented reality, and you can just switch it on fully, and you get away from the world. It will replace fully the phone in the end, because it's no need anymore for a phone in your pocket. So that's, and I think in the end it will be a lens instead of a whole pair of glasses. Yeah, so augmented reality, it's like you have a layer over the real world. So, for instance, when we have here this table, we could have standing here a whole new NASA spaceship, and we can all watch around it. It tracks the space, so it will stay there in the right direction. It will even see the boundaries, so where it falls off. You can have a whole hole here in the wall, for instance. Really look to what Microsoft is doing. It's really cool stuff. And I think in the end, there's also a huge amount of practical possibilities with that. So with designing, with training people. So that's also why, but you will probably know it better, but with all these projections, is that augmented reality is, in the end, it's like 60 to 70% of the projections that they show.
Yeah. One thing with augmented reality, though, is Google Glass was a version of augmented reality. And 2 years ago, we would have been enthusiastic about that. 10 years ago, we would have been talking about how we could live our lives virtually in Second Life, and there were lots of avatars there. And in fact, Second Life was a compromise from people who wanted to create a virtual reality life out there, but the technology wasn't there at that time. But I don't mean to be... so my view is I think it will be slightly more difficult to make a lot of this work. I don't think the technology is there from a mainstream perspective. You can make it work, but it is very, very difficult to do. There is a massive demand for smartphones. I don't think they will go away because they are a very portable piece of technology which are very also accepted. Putting on virtual reality glasses, what we see when people put them on is sometimes people feel insulted by the other people, by the other people in the room. So they get insulted because they feel they're walking out of the room by putting the virtual reality glasses on. One of the other considerations I'd have is, does this need to be all about copying storytelling, or does it need to be copying cinema? Or is this another form of content, another form of communicating, which is additional to what we have here? Because generally what happens when we talk about new tech, it's all about something killing something else. The reality is it tends to be complementing what's already there. So I've been looking at technology and how it's adopted for many years. One thing which is really, really coming through is if technology aligns with what people want to do, the mainstream public, it does really well. If it doesn't, it will be niche. And There are countless examples of that. So technology is absolutely fantastic, but to monetize it has to align with a mainstream public. And when it comes to smartphones, and that they have fantastic screens in there, but the majority of phones which are out in the market cannot do VR. That's a current reality. Also another reality is lots of smartphone vendors out there make no margin. So incorporating a higher pixel rate in their screens is too expensive. That's a reality.
But it took also 8 years to get from 0 to 3.5 billion smartphones, right?
Yes, that's true. A smartphone costs from $30 to $1,000. And we're used to the idea of a smartphone as a homogeneous product, but the reality is you get everything from things you can buy, let's say in the Pearl Market in Beijing, for very little money, all the way to a really impressive high pixel rate screen with a fantastic processor with lots of RAM attached to it. So a smartphone is a single term, but it's the reality that a smartphone is not a single entity. That's a reality. So, and I think it's important to address realities, not what we would like to have. So people can't afford $1,000 smartphones with billions of them. So it's completely true. There's 3.5 billion smart devices out there. So if you look at the tablets which are out there, a lot of them are $40, $50, and the reason why they're bought is so parents don't have to parent. You keep children quiet.
Listen, the applications for VR, AR are way beyond games and live action and movies. It's obviously the applications for real estate and medical and educational and everything else are going to dwarf entertainment in general. And that's going to be the thing that's going to really drive it.
So for education, AR, what's happening? What's happening with AR in education?
What's happening? What?
Yeah, give me an example of a major college which is investing above $10 million in AR.
I just personally had a conversation with the CEO of HTC about putting Vives into classrooms around the country. I literally just had that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, but
so
investors committed money.
Investors are going to come in because there's going to be a reason for it. You're going to have educational institutions. Listen, you got to be a leader. You can't be a follower. If you just watch what everybody's doing as opposed to driving it, that's what you have to do. Otherwise, it's easy to sit back and observe and say, well, this is what it is. But at the end of the day, somebody's got to put the stuff in action. In our conversations, and obviously we're not in the educational space, but there's opportunities in education, and obviously, I'll give you a great example. I've got a kid. She's in 8th grade. She learns history. Every night she comes home and she takes these notes in class, right, on her book. This is the most boring thing I could ever imagine doing it myself, and I remember doing it, and I remember it being boring. If she could put on a headset and go back to the time of the Civil War, or go back to the time of the caveman, or whatever it is, it's so much more effective. It's the immersion will transform the entire educational system. So for me personally, I think that it's there for the taking. The device manufacturers are engaged, the money's engaged, and the government's engaged. So what will be the obstacle?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's a fantastic potential, and it would revolutionize education. So the caveat I would have is, who's going to fund it? Yeah. Right. So governments would love to do this.
The schools will fund it. The government's going to fund it. The money's going to be there because people are going to build a business.
I think there's now one step in between. It's something we see in Holland. It's something we are making at the moment, which comes out in summer. But it's actually brands who step into it, and it's more edutainment, I would say. We're creating something amazing with historic animals, you can fill in it yourself, but which is a combination actually with augmented reality and virtual reality, and it's about cardboards for now to going to classrooms, but also children really seeing it walk in real life.
Good, thanks. We've got another question.
Hi there, this is really, really cool, and I think there's kind of different things going on. It's like the technology itself, the storytelling, and who's interested and why they're driven to the technology. I have an animation festival in Montreal, and I'd love to have this panel there, by the way, P.S. And I had a conversation with someone who is coming to give a talk at the festival on large formats, IMAX in particular, which was invented in Montreal. This is almost the exact same conversation, but storytelling and content kind of killed IMAX up to a certain point. So we see it's, dedicated to sharks and underwater and Smithsonian and all this stuff, but very similar problems. It was very interesting.
Sorry, one thing, if you bring the smoked meat, I'm there.
Oh, it's right across the street.
Let's go. Let's go. I'm there. Done.
Hello, Mark Ashmore from Future Artists in the UK. We've just recently got a load of funding for a building to see if we can experiment with putting VR in front of an audience and see what would happen. This is in Manchester, and we did it through Kickstarter, so we know there's an audience there that are going to turn up. It's two parts. First one is, like the lady there, I'd like to invite you all to Manchester next year for VRWerx, which we haven't announced yet, but will be in March 2017. I'm hoping it's going to be the UK's biggest VR festival dedicated to figuring this stuff out, and it'd be great to connect, so please let's do that before everyone goes everywhere. My second question is, now that I have this funding, and I'm still a newbie, I'm a year and a half into this, I come from film, and I'm now working with game developers, and I'm Unity, and it's blown my mind, and I come from a theatre background, so luckily I'm halfway there. In terms of technology, so that I can see all your work and some of the top stuff that's coming out, they're going to be pioneers, what headset and what computer do I need to buy? And I'll go and order it after this panel.
So one thing for the UK, there are VR cinemas, which are, for example, the Natural History Museum, and which may have travelled up to Manchester, actually. So there is content created by Atlantic Productions, which does lots of natural history productions. So they do a lot of stuff with David Attenborough. They've done lots of stuff in 3D, which for Sky. And so they have facilities based, similar. So it's Samsung Gears, and also what they've got there is they can do simultaneous start of the content. So you do get the simultaneous reaction to the content which is being watched. And I think it's 20 minutes of content going up to 30. But they have done fully CGI content, and also, for example, you can go to the Great Barrier Reef with David Attenborough in a small submarine. So that's some of the content which they've got there, should you so wish. Atlantic Studios, which is based in Hammersmith.
Yes, thank you. You already talked about the fiction and the gaming and a little bit touched about the education, but do you see any business possibilities with certain other types of products like documentaries or lifestyle, nature, even lifestyle or so-called event cinema?
Sure.
Yeah, on Sunday there's a Made in US VR session that I'm hosting, and there's a couple documentary pieces from Riot. They just got bought by a Huffington Post. One, they went to Cuba, talk about the trade embargo there, and another was about New Orleans and the recent influx of violence there. And what's amazing about these documentaries is you really feel like you're there because of presence, and so the stories kind of resonate with you, and you really get a sense of the true nature of what's going on there versus just seeing it on a flat screen. So yeah, documentaries are very, very powerful in virtual reality.
I would say, by the way, that there's no better way to tell a documentary story than in virtual reality, because like you're saying, the immersion's there. That's the whole point of a doc, is to make you feel like you're really there, to understand the environment and everything else. There's no better way to do it than VR.
Same, by the way, for journalism.
Quick question about the VR cinema. What percentage of the people are coming in because they've never tried VR and that's their first experience with the VR? And then also, what's the programming process like for you? And are you interfacing directly with the filmmakers and sort of acting as a de facto distributor from that point?
Yeah. So basically, when we started, we saw that we were really in those early days in 1900 when you had the Pathé or the Danish or the Norsk film, who started off as being producer, cinema, and distributor all at once. And I think that's partly it's a bit the same thing. So we reach out to all producers ourselves. There is no distributor yet, I would say, for this purpose. We see a lot of first-time VR users, but we see them coming back as well. But it's also, I mean, think about the cinema model. It's for the first time experience. It's something, and we can continue on that for the coming half year probably. But most important in the end is the content, where you come from, and the titles and marketing also around the titles, actors, directors who will be making those things, and that will make in the end people come to the cinema on the longer term.
Hey Hey, how you doing? My name's Jamie. I've come from Australia. I'm a visual effects producer who's moved into VR producing, and also because everyone in visual effects wants to come and work in VR, I've started repping designers and developers. Now, in Australia, we've got a very small VR community, but we're very networked, and we're all really supportive. And I'm just wondering, I hear North America is like ruling the game. It's where everything's happening. I'm wondering if we still have that same level of community and mutual support for each other.
Yeah, I think it's pretty impressive the way the VR community is developing. I mean, one thing that's interesting, the hardware makers, in theory, they're all competing with each other, Vive, PlayStation, Oculus, and yet you see a lot of sort of love online where, Palmer Luckey's, talking to the guy at HTC or somebody at Sony, and they're all kind of supporting each other. I think the way that I like to say it is that, the VR pie isn't baked yet, right? So why are we trying to eat it? Let's all try to bake the pie together, and eventually it'll grow into something that's really big. So I think there really is this really great sense of community that's developing. And actually, I think it's kind of developing all around the world. I mean, there's some really interesting spots. This panel is one indication, and people even in the audience. I mean, when you think about early films, right? So early film kind of started off and really got big in Hollywood. And the reason why people went there was because they were trying to escape New Jersey and Edison's film patents. So they went as far as they could in the continental U.S. and they went over to the Hollywood Hills and started shooting some of the first films. I think with VR, you're finding some of the similar stuff, and a lot of it requires an understanding of technology as well as storytelling, right? People who are effectively entrepreneurs. The first filmmakers were entrepreneurs. Lumiere brothers in particular, right? They were this integrated system selling the technology while also developing content. I think you can find that today in the modern world worldwide, and in many ways you're seeing just VR communities develop, not just in North America, but places like New Zealand, Australia, places in Europe, and it's really exciting to see everywhere and go to places and see exciting VR happening.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, Lynette Walworth, who did Collisions, she's actually who introduced me to the company that I have my synchronization box, the simultaneous screening mechanism from. So yeah, it's all over the world, but especially, LA, you just go everywhere and you're like, oh yeah, we live down the street from each other. Who knew? So it's really nice working in this field, and everybody's very supportive because we all know that we all see the future, and we hope that everybody else does as well. And how we can work together to bring everybody to kind of this understanding is what we're all kind of working for. So helping each other out is the way to do it.
Yeah, and by the way, also in terms of Australia, but just like Canada, you're seeing there's a lot of government money that's financing content in Australia, Canada, and everything else. What these organizations, Screen Australia and whoever else, need to do is realize that VR is a viable category. They need to start investing locally and actually let's make it a business as opposed to what they've done with a lot of the films they finance where it's more artistic. The artistic stuff is great, but the problem in Canada and Australia is that they've had trouble creating a real business out of it as opposed to financing art, which is great, don't get me wrong, but there also has to be a business and monetization component to it. And so if the government comes in and spends some of the money on monetizable VR content, you're going to make a business out of it. That's the key.
I think also in Europe, I mean, we don't have the luxury of the high money investors that you will see sometimes in the US, but
there's still a lot of money in Europe. There's a lot of money.
There is money there. Everywhere is money for good ideas, but yeah. I see a lot of. Especially, I would advise everybody also who looks really for content, try to work together with brands because they really see VR as a medium which gives way more better experiences to clients and which can become still special. So they are quite funding also quite some stuff.
We're running out of time, so we have one more question from this gentleman and then closing thoughts from each of you if you want.
Thank you. My name is Roberto Lopez. I'm from New York. As a living, I provide stunt services in New York. I'm a stunt coordinator and a stunt rigger. And my question is, how does somebody like me get his on the equipment, kind of experiment to figure out, because like we do stuff on wire for superheroes being shot for Netflix. But I mean that we're racing wire from like 4 different cameras from all the different angles. So how can I like get my hands on some of this equipment, experiment? So I have the answers when I am working. At some point in my services, if I had a VR job and I have to provide services for them, like how can I get in on this at this stage? Like, where is this stuff available? Like, where can I play with this?
You can buy a Vive or Oculus now. You'll wait 3 or 4 months until you get it, but you can buy one now, or you can buy Samsung gear now. I think and this is me personally speaking. I'm not speaking for my corporation at all. I think that your business is a really interesting business in that the future of entertainment is all going to be in CG. right? So if I can say, as a producer, if I can save all the money on an entire explosion, if I can make it a stunt battle or whatever it is, and I can make it all in CG in my game engine, right? And then put the actors' faces on it afterwards, and I can save half the budget, I will, right? So I think that for you, finding opportunities in motion capture or other areas where you're seeing real opportunity for stuntmen and other people like that to play in the CG or digital landscape, I think there's a future there, because otherwise, to make films with the way they used to be made with a million stunt guys and everything else, now it's all CG, right? So there's an opportunity there for you.
I mean, I do a lot of video games as well.
So you know exactly what we're talking about.
I do, but with them, it's like, how do I make it all work?
Nice. We're out of time. Sorry. Can we just
one quick question? Can you just give us a sense of, in terms of production budget, where you stand, because you've talked about different film series. Can we know how much it costs to develop a 20-minute animated film or TV series? Do you have a sense of that?
Production budget.
Just
Okay.
quickly.
Briefly.
Well, we raised $8.5 million. It's a lot less than that. Typical animation can be $100,000 to $1 million a minute, so it's obviously can be very expensive. I think with us, we have a sort of this tech stack with VR, because VR gets more complicated. So we're a team of engineers as well as artists and storytellers, and so we have sort of this interdependent inside proprietary tech stack that allows us to produce content that's cheaper. I actually haven't counted up the numbers exactly, and we're not completely finished with production, so I can't give you an exact number. But industry thumbnail standard is about $100,000 to $1 million a minute. Now, the other thing is 360 video, much cheaper to produce, right? It's less immersive, but at the same time, it's sort of a way to get yourself kicked off. To the guy who was talking about being a stuntman, you just go buy a 360 camera rig, and you can get kicked off with a few $100.
You can get a Ricoh for about $400, and that actually has an app that live stitches to your phone, so you can have a 360 video and see what you're filming like that, and that's only like $400, I think.
But you will.
It's called a Ricoh. RICOH.
But you will have a shit video.
Yeah. This isn't going to be great, but you can test out the 360.
Yeah, I mean, you can test a lot of dynamics, but it will be the same as you say, like, what's the average budget for a movie? You can go from everywhere. You can do things for 15,000 euros to up to $1 million.
Yeah, 100K to $1 million is about, you can, depending on what camera you want to use and who you go for your post. And
except that, there's some people who spend a lot more than that, right?
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, if you want quality content, it costs money. Now, in the same, like he said, just like a movie, you can spend nothing. I can make a movie right now on my iPhone, or I can get an entire crew. We can make it for a lot more than that. So really, it's just a matter. It's varied budgets, but if you want quality, you have to spend money, and that's why, again, just to go all the way back to the beginning, that's why you want to charge for the content. So there's value for it.
Yeah. One last thought. When you look at the late 1800s, the big blockbuster productions with big stars came from the big opera houses and the big stage play companies, right? They're the ones that cost with productions that cost a lot of money. The films actually that were created in many ways were incredibly cheap, right? We think of films as a new medium, but in some ways, because it's a new medium, you're given sort of a lot of leeway in the early stages, right? Pauline Kael, which is one of the film critics that I like, in the 1960s, she was writing about how the early films in some ways was the great democratic art form, she called it, because unlike the big stage productions that cost lots of money, anyone could go out and sort of film these little things, few minutes long, and then go ship them out in tin cans around the world, and people around the world could see it for a much cheaper price on a production budget basis. I think VR and AR will eventually get much more expensive, but right now you do have some latitude, and a lot of it's about creativity, right? Just figuring out to use the resources you have to make good stuff, and that's, I think, a big part of the name of the game at this moment in time.
Good. Thank you. Any of you want to make a brief parting comment, final thought on what we discussed today?
I think what's really important, because there's been fantastic progress in VR over the last year, and the awareness of it has gone massively high, so it's really high profile. The challenge is to have the right blend of content and equipment, which is out there, which maintains momentum. So the momentum right now is going to be really, really important. So the work that these people are doing is really vital to that, and having the cinemas, the content creation, and really importantly, the monetization is going to be absolutely vital for the next 12 months.
Yeah, buy VR.
Yeah, no, and I would say also really start experimenting, because it's just, I mean, we are all finding it out. We all learn hugely every month, but in the end, you can be vastly a specialist in this also. But it's all to experiment, and try and make great ideas happen, because everybody can be the 16-year-old guy here in the making the most amazing stuff.
Yeah, the thing I would say is this: is go back to the kid inside of you that started wanting to make movies. I assume everybody's here. They're at the Cannes Film Festival. They wanted to make movies at some point. So I would go back to that kid inside you who wants to tell stories, loves storytelling, and realize that there's an entirely new, exciting platform that's going to make a shitload of money, but also you can tell amazing stories in a way that nobody else can. So that's the way I would look at it.
I think I've said quite a lot, but I think I'll close it with saying I've been on a lot of VR panels, but this one was particularly lively and a really, really interesting discussion. So thanks for Paul kicking it off, my fellow panelists, and our incredible moderators. Thank you for a great discussion.
Thank you, Jeremy K.
Thank you.